afternoon and Happy New Year. I'm Dennis Galucki. Welcome to the 559th Imagine Greater Buffalo program and our 181st YouTube Imagine program hosted by the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Thanks for joining us today. This program is created by the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History and Nature, and ImagineLifelongLearning.com. Now, before we get started, a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted and your video turned off. If you have a question or comment, please type it into the chat box and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation as time allows. We are recording this program so you can watch it again later on the Downtown Central Library's Facebook page and YouTube channels. And please, we hope you share the link with others. Now, on to our featured speaker. Joining us today is Mark Goldman, who will talk about provenance. How they get here, where are they from, the backstory of some of the masterpieces in the collection of the Buffalo AKG Art Museum. And this is part one of a two-part program. Mark Goldman came to Buffalo over 50 years ago to pursue a doctorate in history at University at Buffalo. It was at UB that he turned his focus from Sicily to the Sicilian American culture right here in Buffalo. He has been studying, writing, and presenting on Buffalo's own histories ever since. His history books include Albright, The Life and Times of John J. Albright, Tilly, a New York City Girl, 1906 to 2001, and his Buffalo quadrilogy, High Hopes, first High Hopes, The Rise and Decline of Buffalo, Buffalo, New York, City on the Edge, Buffalo, New York, City on the Lake, The Challenge of Change in Buffalo, New York, and City of My Heart, Buffalo, 1967 through 2020, his last of the four-book series. Mark is credited with playing a major role in revitalizing the cultural life of downtown Buffalo as owner and operator of the Calumet Arts Cafe in the Theater District, one of the first rehab building projects to take place on Chippewa Street. He also ran Allen Street Hardware Cafe with his son Charlie and the Allen Street Art Collective. Now, let's give a warm welcome on this very cold day to Mark Goldman. Mark, take it away.
Dennis, thank you. Those numbers that you cited about the work you've done is extraordinary, and we all appreciate it very, very much. 500, that's amazing. 500 plus. Thank you for coming to me. Thank you also for having me here. I see some of my old friends, the Bursteins and Don Ingalls are here, and can't make out anybody else. So this is a two-part program. So what I thought I'd do is kind of introduce the topic, take about 15, 20 minutes to do that, and then take some questions, and then next week go into some more detail. What led me to this, I've kind of fiddling around with an appropriate title. I'm now working with something called Behind the Curtains, the backstory of some of the masterpieces in the collection of the AKG. What led me to this is that in all the time that I spent at the Albright, you'd go and read the label copy, and the label copy would tell you, obviously, the name of the painter, tell you the date it was painted, and then oftentimes it would tell you when that painting was acquired.
Mark, can I just interrupt you a second? Go back just a couple inches. We're getting a good shot of your forehead and your eyelids, but there, perfect. Now take it away from there. We want to see it.
Thank you. I got a gorgeous forehead. But anyway, so you would go and you'd get what I just said. But I'm a historian. I'm always very, very interested in art and art history, but I'm not an art historian. I'm a historian. I want to know more. I want to know, how did this painting get here? Who might have owned it before? what was the journey that particular painting took from the time it was created to the time it arrived at the Albright. So that's what led me to this. And I've outlined a book that has approximately 10 chapters, and it takes 10 different periods in the history of the gallery, and it looks at a few pieces, particular pieces that were painted in each of those time periods. So, for example, one of the chapters deals with, here I'm going to show you this because we don't have slides. Can we see that?
Yep, it looks good.
Yes, you can. So this, of course, is Picasso's La Toilette, which many people know. There's a very, very interesting backstory behind the La Toilette, but it's not particularly well known. And what I did is really mine that story, take the painting all the way back to the time it was created in Paris in 1906, and followed its journey from 1906 to the time it comes to the Albright in 1926, when AKG Goodyear buys it and gives it to the Albright. So that got me into the history of the French art galleries. It got me to learn about this fellow, John Quinn, who was a fascinating Irish-American lawyer and art collector who was one of the first people to collect Picassos. And it got me to the time that Conger Goodyear buys the painting from John Quinn. It got me to see about the relationship between Conger Goodyear and Paul Rosenberg, who was a very, very well-known Parisian art dealer. And then, of course, the story culminates when Goodyear gives this to the art gallery, and the art gallery is very upset about it. And he was expected to become the director of the president of the board in 1927. They reject that. People know this story because they're not crazy about Conger Goodyear's taste in modern and contemporary art. So Goodyear, of course, in 28 and 29 leaves Buffalo, takes his art collection with him, goes to New York, where Mrs. John D. Rockefeller very famously asks our Buffalo guy to become the first president of the Museum of Modern Art. So, which he does, and he remains president of the Museum of Modern Art until 1939, when Nelson Rockefeller takes over. So by looking at this one painting, you basically get a 30-year history from the time it's created to the various people who owned it, to the Paris in the 1920s, to Goodyear as a collector in the 1920s, and to the controversy within the gallery itself that leads to Goodyear's leaving. So that's one story. Another, chronologically, the next story that I tell is about 3 paintings that were all done. Here, can you see this? The famous Modigliani.
Mark, we can, but if you can tilt your screen down a little bit. Again, we're back to just seeing your forehead. That's it. Now we're talking. Thank you.
All right, you can see the painting?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, this painting, I noticed, is it sits, it's in one of the second floor rooms in what's now, I think, the Wilmer's building. There's this Modigliani. Then very, very right next to it is this painting by Chaim Soutine. Can you see the painting by Chaim Soutine?
Mm-hmm.
Famous Carcass.
Yes.
Next to that is a painting which I don't have a copy of by Marc Chagall. So I'm going to the gallery. I see these 3 paintings together, and not only are they sitting together or very close to each other, they were all acquired in the same year, 1939. Painted at different times. So I asked myself, what is going on here? What is happening in 1939 that leads these 3 paintings to be acquired in that particular year? So I started doing research on these 3 particular paintings and on these 3 artists. And what I'm learning, of course, as probably is they have a great deal in common. One, the first thing is that each of these artists is Jewish. Modigliani from Italy, Chagall and Soutine from what's now Belarus. They're all born, and they come to Paris as exiles. They come to Paris as refugees in the right around the First World War era. And they living together in a section of Paris, and they're kind of, enjoying each other's company and learning from each other. And they're part of what's called the School of Paris. They go their own ways. And Modigliani died in 1920. The two other guys, Chagall and Soutine, are all caught up in the German occupation of Paris. So now I get to tell the story of the German occupation of Paris and how these guys how Chagall eventually gets to New York. But why is it in 1930, what happens in 1939 in Buffalo that leads these three paintings to be acquired at the same time? What happened in 1939 is that Seymour Knox and another board member, a guy named Philip Wixer, who doesn't get very much credit, Wixer and Seymour create what's called a Room of Contemporary Art in 1939. They're creating a fund that's insulated from the board of directors so that they can buy contemporary art independent of the interference of the board. And the first three paintings that Knox and Wixer buy are these three particular paintings. So whether they're hung up by accident together, I'm not sure about that, but what I do know is that three paintings that I never knew or thought of to be connected are now connected in several ways. The Jewish origin of the painters, the fact that they're exiles living in Paris, the fact that two of the three are caught up in the Nazi occupation of Germany, and their connection with the Room of Contemporary Art. So that we have a whole story around those three paintings. Then we have a photograph which Joy has made a copy of, and I think she's going to bring it up. Oh, Joy, are you there? No. Okay. So so our next phase. Where do we go after 1939? In 1939, we are going to the abstract expression.
Mark,
Yeah.
Mark,
Oh, there
I
it is.
pulled that up.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a painting, a photograph in the collection of the Albright Knox, the AKG Museum. It was by Alfred Stieglitz, and it was done in 1905. There's a great backstory here. It's quite a maybe I'll tell this story, and then we can stop and save the rest for next week. Stieglitz, as you probably know, it started a school of photography in New York called the Photo Pictorialists. And his idea was to bring the qualities of Impressionist painting to photography, to make photography an art form in and of itself. Well, the director of the Albright Knox is a guy named Charles Kurtz at the time. He was our first director in 1905, had gone to New York and discovered Stieglitz. And he made a plan in 1905 to bring Stieglitz's photographers to a show in Buffalo. And he was planning on doing that in 1909. The problem was that Charles Kurtz died in 1908, 1909, in the middle of planning for the show. So what happens? You know the story about Cornelius Sage. Cornelius Sage was his assistant, not an assistant director, more like an administrative aide, like a secretary. Kurtz dies, and Cornelia, for whom the restaurant is named, Cornelia becomes the director, the first female director of a major art museum in the United States. And Cornelia loved photography. So she reconnects with Stieglitz, and there's an incredible correspondence in the gallery, in the archives of the gallery, between Cornelia Sage and Alfred Stieglitz, in which they're talking about photography. How can we bring the show to Buffalo? Yes, let's do it. Let's not. What are the obstacles? And of course, in 1910, 1911, Cornelia Sage brings Stieglitz's show to Buffalo. It's the first photography show in an American museum. First, the Met in New York does not have a photography show until 1928. So we're 20 years ahead. And of course, MoMA doesn't exist. So Buffalo's way out in front in 1908, 1909, one with the first female director, two with the first museum photography show. The other element of this that I was able to bring to bear on this story, using this photograph as an entree into the story, is the connection that the Albright family has to photography. And that was, I uncovered that when doing my research on John Albright. John Albright's wife, the second wife, a woman named Susan Fuller, had a camera that she got from Albright's friend in Rochester, George Eastman. And she loved photography, Susan Fuller Albright. And she has there are 10 albums of Susan Fuller's photographs that are now in the archives. Now, the reason I got to the archives is in doing my research on John Albright, I got in touch with the family, the Albright family, and they showed me these 10 photo albums that are sitting in an unheated country house in the Adirondacks. So I was able to make a connection between the Albright family and the Albright Gallery, so that now Susan Fuller's photographs are in the archives of the AKG. She was a photographer, quite a good amateur photographer. John and another one, we could stop, I could go on forever with these Albrights of photography. So John's son, Langdon, married the daughter of a Spalding, a big turn of the century robber baron family, Charlotte Spalding Albright. And Charlotte was a very serious photopictorialist photographer, a devotee of Stieglitz. So we have a connection between photography and the Albright family, that then photography and the connection to Cornelia Sage, the connection to the Albright being the first museum that shows photography. So the one image allowed me to kind of be as kind of an excuse to tell this much larger story. And that's the approach that I'm taking with 10 different aspects of the history of the Albright. So there's that 1905, there's the Picasso in the 20s, there's the three painters in the in 1939 as part of the Room of Contemporary Art. I'm doing a chapter also on, you're probably familiar with the Monuments Men. I don't know if you know it, but the curator, the director of the Albright in 1947, a guy named Andrew Ritchie, was tapped by the United States Army to be a monument man, to be involved in the repatriation of art that had been stolen by the Nazis. And so I'm telling that story and using the Van Gogh, the Gauguin, Yellow Christ as an example, because that was stolen. That was a stolen painting, stolen by the Nazis and repatriated. Then, well, we want to stop here probably, and we can go on with this. Oh, look at that. There's Charlotte Albright. Thank you for bringing that up. So let me just tell you the great story about Charlotte. She marries into this family, and they're kind of oppressive, turn of the century, Edwardian family. And from the minute she got married in 1908, she never ever took another photograph. So I have this little secret theory, no substance for it at all, that John Albright said, all right, my son will marry you, but I don't want you ever touching the camera again, honey. That's the end of it. So, she quit, and she was really good. As you can see, she was very good. She could have, had she continued, would become one of our great female photographers. So that's what I'm doing, and I take it all the way up to the Marisol bequest in 2016. So it covers it starts in 1862 and it'll go up to 2016. And I hope to have this done sometime within the next 6 months or a year or so.
Well, we're going to get a sneak preview of your efforts here next week. We'll conclude it.
Yeah.
But it's a total of 10 then, Mark? Am I correct in that? It's a total of 10 different
There will be 10, yes, 10 different chapters, if you will.
ideas, chapters. Okay, good. All right.
Meantime, some of them are being serialized in the Western New York Heritage Magazine. Anne put me in touch with them, and I think they're doing it. I haven't really heard from them lately, but it will be a book of some kind.
Okay. Now, a question I've always wanted to ask you, but I never think of it when we meet. This is my chance. I always heard the phrase that there were more millionaires in Buffalo at the turn of the 19th to 20th century per capita than any other city in America, something like that. And my point isn't whether that's accurate or not, but there obviously was wealth. And unlike the Clevelands and Pittsburghs, a lot of that wealth didn't get handed down, except you could certainly the Oshai Foundation, you think of, but it's the work of what now we call the Buffalo AKG Art Museum. It is the culmination of an awful lot of legacy thinking, apparently by those that preceded us. And would you comment on that? That because you've done so much work on Buffalo, and what do you think?
I think you're. I don't know whether we had the most, but we certainly had a large number of very, very wealthy families here. What happens to them is a big question. And why? How is it that Pittsburgh was able to maintain, and Cleveland to a certain extent? They could there's Cleveland is still the second largest city for Fortune 500 headquarters. We don't have one. And I think
M&T. We've got M&T. That's
I'm not sure if it's a Fortune 500 though. I mean, right. We
S&P 500 it is.
Right.
So.
And we got and we have Just Pizza. But anyway, so I think what happened is in the 20s, because we were not, our local economy was absorbed international. It was absorbed. The economy was nationalizing. It was becoming a truly international economy in the United States. And a lot of these individually owned and locally owned industries were prey for absorption by larger entities. I mean, the most famous one is how Bethlehem Steel, local steel, Bethlehem gets bought out by Bethlehem Steel. I forgot, it was called Lackawanna Steel. And then, but it gets absorbed by Bethlehem in the 1920s. So there's a lot of that going on. Newspapers getting bought out, banks getting bought out. That was the first period of the beginning of concentration of businesses, and we lost out there. And then, of course,
Well, and you had the Depression obviously wiped out some notable folks.
And then, of course, we got murdered by the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1959.
All right, let's see what types of questions we have. Joy?
Great. So Mark Don Ingalls asks, can you talk about the process of tracing a painting's path to the Albright Knox Art Gallery? Where do you start?
That's a great question. You start really with the Albright Knox Gunlock website. You go to their website, and they have a lot of search opportunities. One of them is art at the top, and you press the art, and one of the categories then becomes about the collection. So then you go hit about. You never have to get out of your chair, Don. You hit about the collection, then you punch in, Pablo Picasso, and then the painting will come up. And they do have some provenance in there, sometimes a little bit, but they'll give you enough that you can then follow on your own. They'll say it was painted in a certain year. It'll say the first owner. So let's say with the Picasso, that was owned by a famous gallery guy in Paris named Ambrose Vollard. You can then now go trace Ambrose Vollard. Then you can go look, he sells it to Paul Rosenberg. Then you go look up. So that's the best way to start. The provenance search is on the website of the Albright itself. The archives there are absolutely extraordinary. And someday they'll do it justice they have a wonderful woman named Gabrielle Carlos, the archivist, but they don't have a librarian anymore. They don't have a library. So they have poor Gabby doing so many things that the really important work of archiving, and you all know how important that is not being taken care of as well as it should be. But
Couple more things on this end. I'm going to read some comments and then I'll read one more question. And if people are signing off right at 1 o'clock, Mark is our guest next week as well, but it is a different Zoom login. So someone named Tim Schreier writes, Pittsburgh has an unwritten law that most philanthropy stays in Pittsburgh, 80% of foundation. And then Laura writes, so excited about this upcoming book. We had such movers and shakers in the art world here in Buffalo. I'm so thrilled that you're writing something that will be that will recognize these people.
wow.
And then another question from Don Ingalls. Did Seymour and Wixer go rogue in setting up the contemporary room, or was it sanctioned by the board?
Well, I don't know I mean, Seymour can't go rogue. I mean, he's the guy, you know, nobody's going to go rogue. They can go rogue on him, but he's not a rogue guy. He remembered what happened with Goodyear in 1927, and he wanted to insulate. He was he's an extraordinarily advanced thinker in terms of the arts. And he didn't want to have his hands tied in any way. I don't think they went rogue. What did happen though, the Knox family raised all of the money for the Room of Contemporary Art, but by the late 40s it was over. All their money ran out and it wasn't renewed. Then what happens in the 50s and 60s is that Knox is buying it on his own. He's using his checkbook to buy these paintings and then giving them to the Albright. He's an extraordinary guy, just this little unpretentious man who was just amazing. Someday somebody will, it's very difficult to get material on him though, apparently.
Okay. That's all I've got, Dennis.
Well, that's funny. That's funny. Mention just a couple of the works of art you'll be talking about next week. Just give us a teaser here.
Okay, I'll give you a little teaser. One of the first piece that wasn't the Albright yet, it was called the Buffalo Society of Fine Arts. I think it was called that. It wasn't the Buffalo Academy of Fine Arts. So it was not yet, obviously, called the Albright until 1905. It's called the Buffalo Academy. You guys probably know, I know that some of you do, 1862, the Academy of Fine Arts is created. 1862, the Buffalo Historical Society is created. 1862, the Natural Science Society is created. 1862, there are riots going on in the city of Buffalo over the new draft law. And in 1862, I like these confluence of things around particular dates, obviously. Alfred Bierstadt, the great Hudson River painter, gives what becomes the Albright its first painting, which, as Dennis knows, because I went on his wonderful tour, it's on the lobby, what do you call it, the second floor. His Bierstadt's painting of a cove in Italy is the first painting that what becomes the Albright is given. So I'm using that painting as an opportunity to tell the story of the founding of the gallery.
It'll be a worthwhile story to hear. It's as a docent, it is a starting point for most docents.
I want to give Dennis a shout out here. His docent tour is fabulous, really. And it really helped me think differently about some of these paintings. On the first level, you got this Gottlieb abstract expressionist painting, black and white and red. And right next to it is this Bierstadt. And he connected the two. It was wonderful. It was really good.
Thank you. Thank you. In many ways, we'll wrap up, but seeing beauty in the abstract is the title of that tour. So that's my attempt, is to try to connect things.
Great. It's a wonderful tour, you guys. Really, really good.
Oh, thank you. That's all right. So, Mark, we will look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you very much.
We thank everybody for joining us. Tell others that are interested in our wonderful Buffalo AKG Art Museum. I'm glad you used the catalog. I tend to tell people, I think it's if you go to different art museums, that is one of the most reasonably priced catalogs you're ever going to find in this country. And it's got wonderful detail, and it's really many of the prime pieces of work that are in our possession here in Western New York. So it's a major draw. Canadians are coming. I invariably have folks from north of the border on almost every Saturday tour I do. So thank you, Mark. We'll look forward to seeing you
Thanks
next.
very much.
And folks, thank you for joining us all. Enjoy the cold and winter, and we'll see you next week.
Go, and the Bills, don't forget, you guys.
Go Bills.
You got that right. I got tickets.
There you go. Enjoy, Mark.
Bye.
Take care.